So hello everyone listening. Hello, Andrea. Right, so we are on episode 9. We have nearly completed the series. I actually can't believe it. We are on episode 9, and today we are with the lovely Andria Matta. So today we are talking, it's a little bit of a somber one today, not as upbeat as the other ones. But the topic that we're talking about today is speaking with children about death and loss. And the reason that we're doing it with you is because this is what you specialize in, grief counselling. And the reason I wanted to do it with you, which I think once you start talking, people will understand anyway, but I obviously have a personal relationship with you, and in my own journey of grief, I have come to you at many different times, and I know how amazing you are at your job, and I know how much you can help. And I when we started doing our podcast, one of my main goals was to answer those questions that always get asked. And I think this is a big one, isn't it? How do you talk? How do you broach this topic with your children? What do you say? I know it was for me. In my experience, I had no idea what I was doing. So I think this particular episode, although a difficult one, I actually think it's the most important one I feel that we've done. So I'm happy that you're here to do it with me.
Thank you so much.
As with every episode, we'll start with letting you introduce yourself. So I'll stop talking now.
Thank you, Katerina.
Tell everyone who you are.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Andrea. I'm actually an ex-English and drama teacher, taught for many years, both in Cyprus and in the UK. I stopped teaching to have my youngest child as we were sort of traveling around with my husband's job. And then following on from one of my degrees actually is in psychology, and I've always had sort of an inkling towards psychology and enjoyed the subject very much. So I decided to retrain. 2018, I had a calling, if you like. I needed to do something else. I needed to help others, which is my passion. So I retrained, and I found my specialism in grief counselling, actually. And I never thought, if you'd have asked me that question 10, 15 years ago, I'd have been, no, absolutely not going to talk about death. It's something scary. I didn't understand it. It sort of gave me, and I think as it does with a lot of people, makes a lot of people panic and not quite sure. It's a bit of a taboo subject. But the reason I chose to specialise in grief, bizarrely, was at the time that I was doing sort of the grief in my course, I lost my best friend very suddenly. And for some bizarre reason, I don't know what it was, divine intervention, if you like, I found comfort, if you like, in what I was learning. And then had a placement at a hospice, joined the adult bereavement team, where I was training alongside, obviously, my course, but really being trained by some amazing human beings who, you know, a lot of people were doing this voluntarily, you know, helping others through their grief, which in turn helped me through my grief, understanding the journey that I was on, you know, after having, you know, my friend die very suddenly. So I am qualified in all aspects of counselling, psychotherapy, but I still work very closely with the hospice on a voluntary basis alongside my private practice. But I do have a passion for grief counselling, and it's something that I will always advocate for. And I think, you know, the more we talk about death and the more we talk about people's grief and normalising that journey, the easier it will become for people to be able to talk about the pain that they're suffering, because it's an awful time. It's a raw and very sad time for people when they lose somebody close to them. So yes, you know, I feel that everybody deserves help and kindness and somebody to listen to them. So here I am. This is where I am today.
So what you've just said was one of the first things that connects with one of the first things I wanted to ask you, which was you said a reason why you think it's important for this to be talked about. Why do you think it's important in children's lives for it to be talked about rather than avoided? Because I think a lot of myself included, when my children were younger, the idea of approaching this subject with them, I didn't want to at any point, and then you have to, and you realize, oh my gosh, I can't avoid this. But why is it important to do that in their lives? What will it bring for them?
So if you imagine, if you imagine why you felt uncomfortable in your own mind thinking about death, and how uncomfortable it was for you to talk about it to your children, that probably came from the lack of knowledge that we had generational wise. I mean, because I can remember, you know, my parents and grandparents, it was almost a taboo subject. No, don't talk about death, don't talk about illness. It's that illness, not cancer. It, you know, nothing specific, it was that illness. And obviously that passes down fear into what we hear as children. So coming to your point, why it's so important, I think it's so, you know, easy to see. If we don't talk to our children about it openly, they're going to have the same fears that we did. If you remember what I said a few minutes ago, if you'd have asked me 10, 15 years ago, would you go into grief counselling? I would have said, absolutely not. I was petrified of the thought of death because of an incident that happened when I was a child, and I'll explain in a little minute. So I don't want my children, and I don't want the future generation to have those thoughts and fears that we did. It's so important that all children understand that actually death is a part of life, and it's a very normal part of our existence. And the more we approach that in a positive, gentle way, the less fear they'll have, the less anxiety they'll have attached to death, to their own, obviously, mortality, but obviously, you know, to parents dying, grandparents dying, friends, pets, because we all know, don't we, that usually as a child, the first, you know, bereavement that we suffer is normally a pet.
Yeah, it's usually a pet, isn't it?
Yeah, it's usually a pet, which is quite gentle, even though it can be horrifically difficult for a child at that point. You know, they do come to terms with it eventually. It's about education, isn't it? It's about making sure that the next generation are a generation of, you know, calmer, more understanding human beings, which will help, I think, society in general. And there's nothing worse. You know, I still see clients now who have panic attacks over dying and death, and you know the whole kind of thought around death and dying. And to avoid that, we need to make sure that children understand what it is, but also recognizing that they need a different approach to us. you know, their minds are very different in terms of what they can understand and what they can process. So it's very difficult, obviously, you know, you can't go in and tell a child and talk about death as, you know, an adult would. You have to choose your language carefully, you have to choose your moment carefully, and you also have to understand that they can only understand so much in short spurts.
So in terms of moments, when to do it. So if things that I've noticed a lot, one common thing I've noticed a lot is that grandparents dying is a common one for children, obviously. And when should it be done by parents? So if, you know, a grandparent is sick and we know they're going to pass, should we be telling our children they are going to die, or should we tell them they have died? At what point, what moment do you choose to have this conversation?
I think the most important thing is to be honest. And so whether that is before or whether that is after, I don't think it really matters. I think what is important, though, is being absolutely honest with that child. Obviously, if you tell your child before the grandparent dies, then you are giving them, you know, the time to process that and try and understand also. So it isn't as much, because obviously we know that death isn't sometimes planned, is it? You know, so if somebody dies unexpectedly and suddenly, then you don't have a choice but to tell them. I think the main thing is to be open and honest as soon as you can, to allow the child to process the news. So if say, for example, a grandparent is sick or becomes very ill very suddenly, it's important for them to know and not to kind of hush it, because then it becomes, well, why didn't you tell me beforehand? You know, and giving them the chance, say, for example, to go and say goodbye to their grandparent, because that can obviously help them in their healing process as well. If they're denied the chance to go and see that beloved grandparent before they die, they will always have that trauma with them, you know, and I'm a big believer of that. So I think being open, being honest as soon as, if you know, a grandparent dies suddenly, again, as soon as the grandparent dies, you know, specific language as well. You know, your grandparent, your granddad, grandmother has died. Don't use passed away, don't use lost, don't use fall asleep. It's very important, because that child will then associate falling asleep with dying, and therefore they will have a fear that, oh, if I fall asleep, am I going to die? You know, they can't process the language that we, you know, we understand it as adults. So it's really important to be very direct, to use the word death, died, dies, you know, has died, rather than the kind of euphemisms that a lot of people use. You know, because if you say, oh, has been lost, they're going to be thinking, well, where have they gone to? Why can't they come home? So I think, you know, once you explain what death is, and it's, you know, it is difficult to understand for a child to understand, well, yes, death is very final, but, you know, once they do grasp that concept, it's much easier then for them to comprehend later, if that makes sense.
So what is death, though? So this was one thing that I struggled with, and when I had to do it, because I don't know what death is. So
and it's okay for you to say that to your children, Katerina. And you know, it's okay for you to say, you know, we're talking about something that I don't understand either, and I have had to do that with my own children and say, you know, my best friend died. I don't know what is next for that person. You know, you can, if you are religious, by all means, you can explore your religion and say, well, you know, there is heaven, and that person's soul has gone to heaven, and explain that the body is just a vessel and the vessel has to be buried, or cremated, whatever it is, you know, your beliefs are, and that death means, you know, you don't breathe anymore, and you don't get to feel anymore or see anything or feel pain. So it's really important that you're using that type of language, you know, very realistic, very direct. It sounds very harsh, but in the long run, it is better for the child for you to use that type of language rather than yes, you know, being sort of too descriptive. And as adults, I think we try and explain too much. I think with a child, you have to sort of do it in short spurts and be, like I said to you, be open, be honest, and say, there are some things that I don't know. You know, I don't know what happens when a person dies. However, you know, I would like to hope there is a heaven where, you know, all our loved ones go when they die, and have no pain, and they can perhaps, you know, see us and love us from afar, you know. But it really does, I think, depend on each family's circumstance, you know, in terms of religion and whatever you want to,
in their beliefs.
yeah.
Well, yeah,
but
because
think,
I mean, when it was my own experience, I mean, we're not very religious. We talk to our children. They go to church, obviously they're Christian. In my own experience, it was very difficult for me when I had to tell them about someone dying, and that one of the questions was, so I'll never see them. And I don't know why I wasn't expecting that question. But my instinct, I couldn't crush their hopes. I couldn't do it. I couldn't say, no, you won't see them again. So my instinctive response, which I've always questioned, was I wrong in saying that, was one day we will all go to heaven and we will all be together again. And as soon as I said it, I thought, oh God, I shouldn't have. Why did I say that? Now he's going to think. And I went into this whole panic of, oh gosh, have I done the wrong thing? But I think in grief, as well as an adult, we have to be a bit soft on ourselves, and we're also going through something difficult. And as you said, we don't have the answers.
Yeah. And I think actually your answer was perfect. I really do, because it's your own personal belief. You know, what you're doing is saying, you know, I hope and believe that one day we will all be together again. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually giving them a comfort. And it's, you know, it's a softer way for them to be able to understand, if you like. And it is related to the way that your children are being raised as well, because of your religion, your background, your churchgoers, you know, you believe in heaven. So it's nothing out of the ordinary. It's not that all of a sudden you've kind of pulled heaven out of a bag and going, there you go, there's that, you know. And so it is something really important to, you know, to advocate. If that is what you want to tell your children, then please do. If you have any spiritual beliefs, you know, use them by all means. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it. You know, there's no right or wrong with this. It's just how a family deal with it individually, you know, in terms of beliefs. You're human at the end of the day, and people will say things that, oh, should I have said that? Should I have done that? You know, your child will be fine. They will get through it. It's just having the patience, you know, because children need long-term understanding, if you understand what I mean. They can't sit with grief all in one go like adults can. You know, adults will say, for example, like it's like a river of grief, and it goes on and on and on for a long time, whereas children, they can't do that. It's almost, what we call it is jumping in and out of puddles. So, you know, imagine the puddle is their grief, and they will go into the puddle and stay there for a little while, but because they cannot comprehend that amount of sadness in one go, they'll jump out and they'll be distracted, and they'll go and play, they'll, you know, go and watch TV or go and colour or go and play. Do you see what I mean? Whereas adults, their grief is felt differently. But don't be alarmed if your child does that. so kind of jumps in and out of their grief. That is really normal. And I've seen that, as I say, with my own children, when we were all grieving so awfully for my friend. My grief was that deep river that didn't go, I couldn't get out of it for a long time. Whereas the children were able to. They were in and out. So they'd go to school and they'd go and play with their friends and they'd go and do other activities. But then I could see when they needed to regroup for 20 minutes, half an hour, come and talk to me about their feelings. And that's when you need to listen, and you need, to have open arms and be open, in what you say to them. And as I said before, if you don't know the response, say, I'm not sure about that, but, we can work it out together. But please know that I'm here when you need to speak to me. And obviously, that is maybe talking, about an older child. When a child is very much younger, that is a little bit more difficult because their comprehension of grief is quite hard. They will go obviously in and out of the puddle of grief as well. But perhaps they'll need a little bit more work to be able to talk, and that is much more than on the parent or the caregiver to be able to do that. And bring those thoughts and feelings out of them, maybe through colouring, through a sandpit, through music, just allowing each child to be able to express their feelings in as much detail as they can.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to mention in our conversation is it's actually something I learned from you in our conversations, which was I've always, when I had to, again, talk to my children about it was very difficult for me because of the pain I was in, to keep it together when I had to tell them about the loss we had gone through. And I couldn't not cry. And I remember I pulled myself together and I thought, right, we're going to go tell them and I'm not going to cry. But as soon as we had to do it, I was a mess. And for so long, I felt so guilty for not being strong for them and for maybe scaring them and worrying them. And then I've come to realize through conversations with you, it's okay to be human.
It
really it's okay to show that.
It really is, because what you're doing, Adelina, by crying in front of them and showing them emotion, is that it's okay for them to do the same when they need to, with you or, with the friends, with their whoever, in whatever circumstances they're in. It's okay to have emotions. And then in turn, it will be okay for them to teach their children to be able to do that. So, it's breaking that cycle of the generational taboo. You cannot show your feelings, and we really need to break that. It's fine to show your feelings. If you want to cry, you can cry. You're allowed to. You're human. How other way does one express themselves if they are in the midst of a deep and utter heart-wrenching grief? How are we expected to continue if we don't show our emotions? It's a release valve at the end of the day. And I know I feel like that. Even if it's not about grief, it could be about anything. If, I find myself, I've cried and I felt, oh, actually, I feel better now. It's a type of self-regulation, if you like. So no guilt. We don't want guilt. We want to leave guilt, back there and move forward. And, don't feel guilty about crying in front of children, your child, or expressing your emotions. Because obviously they're learning from your behavior and they will know, okay, mama's really upset about this. It's a big thing. So you're actually teaching your children emotions and how to, talk about them. Then we can move on and then go back and talk about them again. But I'm a big believer that all of this kind of taboo, we're not allowed to talk. We've got to brush everything under the carpet. We're not allowed to talk about death, sickness. it needs to stop, because what is happening is we're finding that more and more of the older generation are suffering with anxiety and depression because they feel that they can't express their emotions. So yes, we need to leave the guilt behind and talk, and you know, and be happy and feel as if we are empowered with it. You know, our emotions are important at the end of the day.
Yeah. I do appreciate the, you know, that you've said that we shouldn't be brushing it to the side. It is something, admittedly, I definitely did as a parent, because, as I said, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. I didn't know what I was doing, and all I wanted to do was protect my children. I think any parent in this situation, that's all they want to do, and all I wanted to do was, let's not worry about it. Let's just move on with life. This has happened, but it's okay. And I remember we told them, and I said, yeah, but listen, do you know that we bought you some new stuff for your room? And it literally was in the same breath. And what happened afterwards that I think I could never have anticipated, and I don't think any parent in this situation could have anticipated, is that it came back later to bite me in the ass when my son started having very bad anxiety, separation anxiety about death, anxiety that I was going to die, because the death that he'd experienced, his first death that he'd experienced was sudden. So he had so many questions that I did not let him answer, because it was, listen, you know, she's gone, but guess what I bought you for your room? Because I didn't want to see him crying. I didn't want to see him, you know? And I think it's never I wish I'd seen this type of conversation on a podcast episode, so that I would know not to do something like that, and to just let him ask those questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so, I mean, thanks for bringing that up, actually. And I know it's really painful for you as well to talk about, but it's so important to give them the space to understand what's happened and to let them ask the questions, no matter how painful, because by not asking the questions, what they're doing is pushing it down. And like you said, it comes back and it bites you, you know, very suddenly and a million times worse. You know, and unresolved grief in children, as you said, can lead to terrible behavioral problems, and almost, you know, each child then regresses. It can lead to bedwetting, or, you know, talking like a baby again, sort of that wanting to use that baby language. And, you know, they're frightened. They don't know what's happening. They start having nightmares. They don't want to eat, all of the above. So again, it's so important to be able to talk really openly and honestly when the death occurs, no matter how painful, you know, and it will be very short, and then it'll come back, and then, you know, they will revisit again and again and again until it becomes sort of clear in their mind. But don't feel bad about how you dealt with it, because if you're not educated, if you're not told how to deal with it, how would you know? Your primal instinct is to protect your children. And, you know, again, we're taught protecting children means kind of, you know, not allowing them to see or hear anything that is going to affect them. But what we need to remember is actually death is a part of life, you know, and it's going to be there with them at some point, whether it be a pet, a grandparent, a parent, an auntie, an uncle, a friend. So the more educated they are, you know, the better for them in the long run, and they will not then associate death with something awful and scary, and let it affect their behavior, because that will just happen subconsciously anyway. And it's not that, you know, don't think I'm saying even if you do talk to your child, it's not going to affect them. Of course, death is going to affect them, but then what you're doing is you're giving them the tools to be able to talk about death and loss and bereavement and how they feel, because that is the key, to be able to talk about how you feel having had that bereavement. You cannot express all of those thoughts and actually ask somebody, or somebody say to you, you know, what you're feeling, what you're going through is normal, and you will get through this cycle, you know, this journey. It will pass to a degree. You will always have your grief there, like a little balloon sat on your chest, but eventually you'll learn to grow around your grief and understand it and be able to breathe easier again. So, you know, it's about allowing them the space as well to understand that it hurts now, but it won't always feel that bad, you know, and we've experienced that as adults. So imagine how they feel. So they need the tools to be able to understand, you know, that yes, it hurts, but it won't always feel that bad. And it's the old cliche, isn't it? That time is a healer. You know, it doesn't go away, but eventually you kind of move forward with a little bit of hope. And it's important that children understand that as well, that they have hope moving forward, and they can understand the concept of death.
My last question is, after somebody has died, should that person be present in our lives? Is it just a constant reminder to the children that they've died and they're not going to see them now? And should we keep that, you know, as they say, should we keep that person alive, or should we avoid any discussion about that person?
I mean, it's a really good question. And I think it's something that a lot of people do think about. And in our grief counselling, we keep the person very much alive. So we encourage, you know, the person who's had that bereavement to talk about their loved one, to tell us about them, to bring in photographs. We make photo albums together. We, you know, can make memory boxes, all sorts of things for them then to go away and have that. And we encourage them to have photographs around the house, and to have some type of memorial for their loved one. So the answer is yes, and it's the same for children. It's really important that they feel there's a connection to their loved one, no matter, you know, that death has kind of separated them. Imagine what the child would feel if there wasn't a connection, if all the photographs were removed, if all traces of that person were removed from their life, having had someone, you know, say for example, you know, their parent there 24 hours a day, and then suddenly they're not, and then not only, you know, there has the parent died, but then all traces of that person has been removed. It's, as you say, it'll be okay for a little while, but then you have to think about the repercussions afterwards. And it really is very, very important to do this sort of gradually, you know, have them very present in their lives through photographs, through watching perhaps, you know, sort of videos of their loved one, making sort of memory boxes of them, albums, and then, you know, slowly, obviously, it will happen organically anyway, where, you know, the child will not want to then always revert back to looking at the photographs, or the videos, or whatever it is that they've created, you know, but they know it's there if they need it, and they know that there is a connection if they need it. It's validating that person's existence in their life and not saying, actually, that person's not here anymore, so that relationship didn't mean anything, because it did. Especially, for example, if it was a parent that died suddenly, and if the child was extremely close to the parent and had a, you know, a very special bond, in, you know, with different aspects. Say, for example, they played Lego together, or they, you know, went out together and did a certain hobby together, and then that stops. It's a loss, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's a huge kind of, you know, they feel like as if their heart's been ripped out at the best of times. So it's really important to keep that connection. It's really important. And I want to share with you, I've got, well, there's a lovely quote actually from a poem called The Invisible String. Have you heard of that?
No.
No, it's by Patricia Kirst. And she writes, this is an extract from the book, actually. She says, and this is a conversation with a child, people who love each other are always connected by a very special string made with love. But if you can't see it, how do you know it's there? Asked Lisa. Even though you can't see it with your eyes, you can feel it with your heart and know you're always connected to everyone you love. So that's a really apt point, actually, for us to kind of, you know, bring that in. It's a reminder to all of us that teach that to your child. Teach that even though death is, it's a finality, if you like, on this earth, you can teach that there's a connection. It doesn't have to be lost. And I think it's really important that each child knows that there can be a connection with their loved one, you know, even after death. And think of the invisible string. I mean, you can use that analogy anyway with your child, if, you know, in separation anxiety. It doesn't just have to be about death, but it can be in any scenario. But I think this is particularly apt for the subject that we're talking about. You know, it's not lost. It's not lost.
That's really, I really like that.
Me too.
So thank you so much for sharing. I honestly hope that everyone, someone needing to hear this advice, I hope it helps a lot of people. It would have helped me. It would have helped me a lot had I known before. So yeah, that's why I said at the beginning, this was a topic I've been wanting to do for a while, but I actually, to be very honest, I was struggling myself to do it. But I'm glad we did it, and I'm glad we approached this topic. And I hope it helps everyone.
Me too.
So I would like to say a huge thank you for taking the time to have a chat. It's always a pleasure having a chat with you.
You're welcome. And it's always a pleasure to be with you.
So thank you to everyone who listened. If anyone wants to find you, they can also find you on social media, can't they?
Yes, they can. Under Andria Matta Counselling. I'm on Instagram and Facebook.
Perfect. And you do online, because obviously that's how we chat.
I do online, telephone, internationally and UK based as well. So if anybody does need any advice, they can reach out to me.
Perfect. Well, thank you. It's been lovely. And thank you to everyone. Until next time. So we'll say bye here. Bye. Bye.